This is the Patrick Alexander Podcast. Welcome to your upgrade.
Welcome. I want to start this episode with just a simple announcement. Later this month, I will be changing my social media handles to Patrick Alexander Coach. And I want to be very clear from the start. This episode is not going to be about a name change. It's not a rebrand announcement. And it's not me explaining a marketing decision. But the name change is just the visible part. It's actually just the surface layer. What I actually want to talk about today is identity. And more specifically, rigidity. Because as people get older, something very predictable tends to happen. You hear a certain sentence more and more often. And that sentence is, "This is just who I am." And that sentence is rarely said with curiosity. It's usually said with finality. Like as if a door has been shut, as if no further movement is required, as if the conversation is over. Now, from the outside, you can accept someone exactly as they are. I guess that's not the issue. But the deeper question is, have they stopped relating to themselves? Because the moment someone says, "This is who I am, that's it," what they're often really saying is, "I am done looking." No more self-reflection. No more adjustment. No more friction. Just acceptance without growth. And this isn't just philosophical. This shows up in very practical, everyday ways. It shows up in how people eat, in how they move, and how they sleep. It shows up in how they recover and how they structure their lives. People say things like, "I've always eaten this way," or "My body just doesn't like exercise," or "I'm just a bad sleeper. I've tried everything," or "This is what works for me." I like that one. And again, those statements sound like self-knowledge, but very often they're just identity closure. They're not the result of ongoing observation. They're the result of stopped questioning. Physically, we all understand rigidity. If you stop moving, you stiffen. If you stop loading the body, it loses capacity. If you stop challenging balance, coordination, strength, mobility, things slowly start to degrade. Nobody argues with that. But mentally and psychologically, the same thing happens. But it's just more quietly. When identity becomes fixed, curiosity disappears. And when curiosity disappears, growth doesn't slow down. It stops. Now, I want to be very precise here. I'm not saying we have no personality. I'm not saying there isn't a core structure to who we are. Of course, there is. Decades of experiences shape us. Temperament matters. Patterns matter. History matters. There are traits that remain relatively stable over time. But there is a difference between having a structure and being trapped inside it. There is a difference between knowing yourself and closing the door on yourself. And that difference becomes more important and not less as we age. Because as the body changes, as responsibilities change, as energy changes, as priorities shift, the old identity, it often stops fitting. And instead of updating it, many people defend it. They say things like, that's just how I've always been, or I'm too old to change, or people should just accept me, or this is my personality. And other people can accept that, but the cost is paid internally. Because when you stop questioning yourself, you stop developing. And when development stops, life starts feeling smaller. Now, food is basically one of the clearest places where this shows up. People lock into a way of eating, sometimes because it once helped them, sometimes because it feels familiar, sometimes because it became part of who they think they are. And then they stop checking in. They don't ask how their energy feels now. They don't ask how their digestion responds now. They don't ask how their sleep is affected now. But they defend the identity instead of listening to the body. And when the body starts pushing back, fatigue, cravings, inflammation, poor sleep, the response often isn't curiosity, it's justification. This is just my metabolism. This is just my age. This is just how I function. And that is not awareness. That is resignation. And the same thing happens with movement. People decide who they are in relation to exercise. For example, I'm not a gym person, or I hate cardio, or I used to train, but that phase is over, or I'm just not built for strength. And instead of asking, what does my body need now? They protect an old story. But hey, bodies change. What worked at 25 may simply not work at 45. What felt possible at one stage may require a different approach later. And refusing to adapt isn't discipline, it's attachment. And attachment costs more and more over time. Sleep might be the quietest place this shows up. So people normalize exhaustion. They normalize poor sleep. They normalize running on stress. And they say things like, I've never slept well. I only need 5 hours. I'll catch up later. I'll sleep when I'm dead. Again, it sounds like acceptance, but very often it's just another closed door. No curiosity about the nervous system. No willingness to adjust routines. No openness to changing habits that basically no longer serve them. Just identity. This is how I am. Until the body says otherwise. And my own work is a simple example of how this process plays out. I started with carnivore and fitness. And at that time, it made total sense. Food and training were the biggest levers. They were what I needed to understand first. Then, from carnivore and fitness, it became functional carnivore because biology mattered more than ideology. And then that turned into functional health coaching because sleep, recovery, nervous system regulation, and overall capacity mattered more than diet alone. And now I'm using my own name, Patrick Alexander. Not because the previous versions were wrong, not because they failed, but because each one eventually became too small. Reality outgrew the label. My work evolved. My understanding evolved, and the questions people needed help with evolved. And instead of forcing reality back into like the old frame, I just adjusted the frame. And that wasn't inconsistency, that was responsibility. And this is where people can get uncomfortable because we're taught explicitly or implicitly that consistency equals integrity. But that's not necessarily true. I mean, integrity doesn't mean staying the same. Integrity means staying aligned with what is real. If new information emerges and you refuse to update, that is not integrity. That is ego. Rigidity feels safe. It's predictable, it's familiar, it protects you from uncertainty, but life doesn't reward rigidity. Nothing in nature stays the same. Bodies adapt or decay. Systems evolve or they collapse. Relationships deepen or stagnate. And yet we expect our identity to remain frozen as if that's what maturity looks like. And truly, I don't think it is. I think that maturity looks more like this: being willing to say, this used to fit, and now it doesn't anymore. Being willing to notice discomfort without immediately defending yourself. Being willing to sit in silence long enough to feel where you're holding on, not because it's true, but because it's familiar. And that silence is uncomfortable because without the identity, there's uncertainty. Without the story, there's exposure. And that's exactly why people cling to the "this is who I am." It ends the conversation. It removes responsibility and it prevents further movement. But the cost of that closure can be high because the world keeps moving anyway. Your body keeps changing. Your nervous system keeps responding. Your environment keeps shifting. And if you don't move with it, you don't stay still, you fall behind. Now, just to be absolutely clear, I'm not claiming I'm flexible in, in every area of my life. I'm not a saint, I'm not enlightened, and I'm definitely also not finished. There are areas where I resist. There are areas where I'm stubborn. There are places where I still default to old patterns, but I am willing to look. And that willingness matters. And that's the invitation here. Not to change your name, not to reinvent yourself, not to burn your life down, but just to pause before saying, this is who I am, and ask instead, is this who I am right now? Or is this who I've stopped questioning in my body, in my habits, and in my life? Because those are not the same thing. At the moment you stop questioning, growth doesn't just slow down, it just stops. And eventually the cost of staying the same becomes higher than the discomfort of changing. And that is all I wanted to leave you with. Not an instruction, not a method, not a conclusion, but just an invitation to look honestly at where you might be holding still in a world that never is. And if this resonated with you, I really would love to hear where it landed. You can leave a comment down below. Please share. I'd love to hear where you noticed rigidity in your own life, whether that's in your habits, your health, or in how you see yourself. And if you know someone who might recognize themselves in this, please feel free to share it with them. And that is not to convince them of anything. It's more an invitation to a moment of reflection. So thank you for being here. Until next time. And as always, welcome to your upgrade.
Thank you for watching the Patrick Alexander podcast.